So welcome to part 2 of my journaling tips, how you can get started with journaling, the benefits of journaling, different journaling practices that you can adopt. So if you haven't seen part 1, go ahead and watch part 1 now. I'll add a card so that you can link to it, and then we can follow up with part 2 here. So this next type of journaling, I just like to call it deep dive. And it's essentially where you look at a pattern in your life or something that you've noticed is recurrent in your life. Maybe you've seen this same thing play out in different scenarios over and over, or you realize that in certain situations you tend to behave in a certain way or things like that. You basically identify a pattern and you want to get to the root of why this is happening, why you're behaving in that way, why you feel those emotions around this thing. So I'll give you an example because I realized that all of this sounds very abstract. So I was just looking in my own journal, looking at a deep dive journal entry that I did, and it's around a pattern that I have where I kind of have a fear of public speaking. It's not a completely crippling fear. I mean, if I have to do it, I do it. I do it for my job and things like that, but it's definitely not something that makes me feel comfortable. Like, I definitely feel very uncomfortable, and it's something that I've had to work very hard on. It's something that if I could avoid completely, I would avoid it. And because I have high standards for myself, and I don't like the fact that there's something that I struggle with, it's something that I want to understand, why this is happening, why I become so flustered. And it's probably also something that contributed to my delay in starting YouTube, because yes, it's not public speaking, there aren't people right here staring at me right now, but it's still a fear of being seen, it's still a fear of exposure, it's still people listening to you or you addressing people. And it's definitely something that is triggering for me and causes a physiological response. Like, I literally develop kind of stress responses because it's something that feels so uncomfortable. And I'm sharing this because I know loads of people have this. I'm not unique. And you can do this kind of deep dive for anything. But this is just a pattern that I identified, something that I wanted to work on, something that I wanted to explore further and understand how I could help myself in this situation. And I think the first thing with anything is awareness, right? So I really wanted to understand where this fear was coming from, why I had this fear, so get that awareness so that I could know exactly what I needed to do to kind of make things better. So the key things was I basically just outlined the problem, outlined how I felt whenever I'm in front of a crowd or whenever I'm asked to do something like that. How does it make me feel? And then I would go deeper. When else have I felt this way? When was the first time I noticed this kind of thing? And really try to hone in on this and focus on it and really try to understand where it comes from. And when I was kind of like mentally asking myself those questions and I was writing down my responses, I realized that one of the first times this happened, so most of you probably don't know, when I was younger, I moved countries like as a child, right? And it was a complete culture shock. I moved somewhere where people spoke differently. Of course, it was still English, but there were definitely nuances, there were definitely differences. And I realized that in certain situations as a child, I would say something or do something, and typically in a crowd, and it would be different from, the custom in the new country. And that difference would be pointed out to me, like, oh, we don't say it like that. We don't say that here. And then I internalize that and I would feel embarrassed or ashamed, and I think that's where it came from. I developed this thing where I started to question myself, and I wanted to kind of shrink myself and hide and not kind of put myself forward in front of people in case I said something that came across in a different way than I intended, in case I said something that was wrong. And it's interesting because often when we have these patterns and things, and when we look back at them, a lot of them stem from childhood. So a lot of the things that we experience right now and the problems that we have, if we look and if we dive deep enough, often there's some sort of event or a few events in life around our childhood that made us develop beliefs. For instance, I guess a belief that I formed is if I speak up, or if I put my opinion forward, or if I speak out in a crowd or something, I could be judged. Or if I say something in public, it could be wrong, because that's what I experienced as a child. And so I adopted that almost blanket statement. And so it made me fearful as I got older of standing up in front of a crowd, of speaking to a large audience, because of that fear of like, what if I say something wrong and I don't realize? And obviously nobody wants to be in that position, because it doesn't feel good. You have these physiological responses, you feel judged, you feel threatened. In an evolutionary sense, it's something that we try to avoid like the plague, because nobody wants to be the outcast, because that, you know, was tied to our survival. And so you want to always blend in and always fit in with the group. And so if there's anything that would threaten that, you tend to avoid it. And so I could see very clearly, just by doing this sort of deep dive exercise, I could kind of track that habit, go back to the root of it, and see exactly why I have this fear. And it was good, because it allowed me to have more compassion for myself. Like I said, I have very high standards for myself. And so I was genuinely annoyed. You know, I was feeling like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just be like everyone else? Why do I struggle with this? I shouldn't be struggling with this. But when I realized like where it stems from, I was able to have more compassion for myself, and I was able to understand, okay, it's just the little me inside that still thinks this is a threat. And then I could kind of reprogram myself, and this is something I'm still working on, but it's something that I can remind myself, like, okay, what happened back then is not the same as now. And so you don't need to take beliefs that you developed back then based on what happened and apply them to now, because now is different. Now you're older, now you have more knowledge, etc. So it's a very, very good exercise. And like I said, it can be very healing, because you can kind of be more compassionate towards yourself or towards other people, depending on what the issue is. And you can kind of formulate a plan of how to overcome this issue, because once you have awareness of it, you then know how to move forward. So this next one is all about gratitude. There are lots of ways that we can practice gratitude, and I'll probably do a separate video just on the various ways that we can kind of incorporate gratitude into our lives and the benefits of it and things like that, because that's a whole separate topic. But one way that we can practice gratitude is by journaling. You can do this by, I think the bullet journal or the 5-minute journal has this, where, you know, every morning or every evening you kind of write down 3 things that you're grateful for. And that could be very small things. There aren't going to be amazing things happening every single day. So it could be as simple as, I'm really grateful that I got to go and have a coffee with a friend today. Or I'm really grateful that I got 8 hours of sleep last night and I woke up feeling refreshed. Simple things, but it's just kind of training your mind to focus on the positive things in your life as opposed to negative things, particularly first thing in the morning. And it really sets you up for a good day. It sets you up just to recognize that life isn't all bad, that there's lots of good things happening. Because I think naturally we can tend to focus on negative things, and it's very good to just remind ourselves that actually there's lots of positive things happening. And when we focus on those things, we become more aware of all the other positive things, and we attract more good into our lives. So if you want to do this and you don't necessarily want to just write lists all the time, you could also just, you know, have a session where you reflect on some of your achievements or some changes that have happened. For instance, sometimes our lives can change and we can be so caught up in the moment that we don't actually reflect and feel grateful for positive changes that have happened. Sometimes you can spend years being miserable about a certain aspect of your life and you want that to change, and then it changes and you don't even acknowledge it, or you don't kind of recognize it because you've moved on to the next thing. And this again has to do with that mindset. If you're not constantly in the mindset of looking for the good and being grateful for things, you can often miss these things. So what you can do is just sit and kind of write about some of the things that have changed in your life, write about some positive things that have happened, some things that you're grateful for, write about your family if you know you have a close relationship with your family, or write about things that you're grateful for in your partner, if that's the case, and just seeing those things in front of you, particularly if you're feeling down or you're having a day where, you know, you're not in the best mindset, you're not making any progress in life, or you're not feeling the best about yourself. If you can write down and list these positive things, or all of these things that you have that are reasons to be grateful, all of these wonderful things in your life, it could be as simple as, you know what, I'm really grateful that I have a roof over my head and I don't have to sleep on the street. I'm really grateful that I can just walk to the fridge and there's food there. You know, that's not the case for everyone. Mindset changes even. If you can acknowledge those things and write those down, sometimes just seeing it in front of you can really evoke that feeling of gratitude within you. It can completely change your state. It can make you so appreciative. Problems are still problems, but sometimes we don't have perspective, or we don't acknowledge our blessings and acknowledge all of the wonderful things that we have and the reasons to be grateful. And so it's a very good practice to do, just to ground yourself, center yourself, have some perspective. I guarantee that things are not as bad as you think. Once you make a list and you start that process, you'll realize that actually I have a lot to be grateful for. Life isn't so bad. Maybe I'm not at my final destination. Maybe I'm not exactly where I want to be, but actually I've made a lot of progress because I'm no longer where I was. And so it can be really good for just shifting your state. And it's not just feeling grateful for the sake of feeling grateful. It's to really have an appreciation for progress that you've made, for blessings in your life, and that in itself is what is transformative and changes your energy, changes your outlook on life, and changes your experiences. So the next type of journaling is, let's say you've had a breakup or something with somebody and you don't feel as though you have had the opportunity to say everything that you wanted to say or have questions answered and things like that, and you're feeling very stuck. There hasn't been closure in the situation. So one school of thought that I believe is that if a situation like that happens, the fact that somebody would leave you in that state is closure in itself, because that says a lot about what they think about you and your well-being and things like that. But not everybody will kind of see it that way. Sometimes you really feel like you need to go over some things and to kind of mentally process and work through some things. So this is when this kind of journaling can be really useful. Just pretend that your journal is that person that you want to speak to, and you just kind of lay it all in your journal. You could even write it as though you're writing a letter to this person, to say all the things that you weren't able to say and things like that. And the idea is you're not going to send this letter, but it can be really transformative and it can be really healing, because you create an outlet for your feelings. You're able to express yourself. Yes, maybe you're not able to express yourself directly with this person, but it's still better than keeping these feelings in. It's still better than bottling things up and not processing it. The way that we heal is through feeling the emotions. And so one way that you can evoke emotion is to go through the feelings, say all the things that you wanted to say, express your anger, for instance, express your disappointment, all of those things. Feel those feelings, write them down. And the idea is you release them from your being. And that is definitely way healthier than keeping things in. And yes, it's not the same as speaking to somebody directly. And yes, you're not going to get a response. But actually, whilst you're journaling, you can sometimes answer some of your own questions, or you come to different conclusions. So if you're having to ask certain questions, if you're having to do this exercise because somebody has left you in this position, for instance, then, you know, you can gain clarity and realize, like, okay, you know what? I didn't even deserve this. This person doesn't even deserve my time, for instance. And so you can get closure in that sense. So it's still very useful. And this can apply to anything, not just relationship. Maybe you applied for a job, or you went for an interview and they didn't call you back, you didn't have any feedback, and you can kind of release your feelings about that. And actually in that process, maybe you'll realize, you know what, I wouldn't want to work for a company who wouldn't even call me back or explain. You know, I spent a lot of time preparing for this interview, maybe I spent a lot of money, I made the effort to travel and all of these things, and they didn't have the courtesy to even give me feedback. So you know what? This is a blessing in disguise. I actually would never want to work for a company like that anyway. And so you get your closure that way. But the idea is just to process your feelings through your journal, express all the things that you wanted to express, to release them from yourself. And in doing so, you will often find that you come to conclusions, that you find closure, and you find more peace within yourself because you have been able to release things and you answer some of your own questions. So guys, I hope you're enjoying this journaling series that I've started. It turns out I have so much to say that there will actually be a part 3 and possibly a part 4. So stay tuned for that in the coming weeks, and don't forget to subscribe before you leave.